We all have something to share. No share with Dr. Dave.
Yeah, well, hello and welcome to the Knowledge Share with Dr. Dave podcast. I am Dr. Dave A. Cornelius, affectionately known as Dr. Dave, and I am your host. Uh, Today's topic is lessons from enterprise business agility transformations. I just want to let you know, transformations are hard because we're changing people's behavior, ways of working, and introducing new language. Often many questions arise, such as how we know we're successful, or can we shift from an output to an outcome focus, centering the attention on the needs of customers and markets? Um, Important, can we honor past successes and acknowledge the need to change? And we just have to be mindful that we're in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous VUCA business climate. So my guest today is Mike McKeegan, a leader that I partnered with for about 2 years on a business agility transformation initiative. And recently we just saw each other at Agile 2024, the conference, and the connection felt so natural, although we had never met in person before. Everything was remote. So we spent time being vulnerable with each other, which helped to build trust. That's a really important aspect. So let me bring Mike on stage, and we're going to pepper him with like really good questions. We're going to see if he's going to sing for us or not. We'll see what he comes up with. Hey, Mike, what's going on?
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Dave. It's always great to see you.
Likewise. So I heard you may have had like a song or a spoken word to inspire us today.
Yeah, I'm not gonna grace you with my bad singing voice, but the quote that I've been reflecting on lately is from Claire Hughes Johnson, and it's "Say the thing you think you can't say."
Mm.
And I think for me, at least, that really resonated because it's a lot about let's deal with the elephant in the room. I think so often we struggle with communication because we're not talking about the main thing. There's lots of friction, but the friction isn't about the thing that's being dealt with right now. It's something else that's so much bigger. And I think, it just, it's a lot about, building trust and as you say, being vulnerable to get to, I think, a good working agreements with everyone. I think that's just so important.
Certainly. So let's jump in, and you could do maybe a short, bio about yourself. I'd normally get people to introduce themselves instead of me reading off their bio. I think you'll do a much better job than I would.
Well, thank you. I always find this a little bit embarrassing, but over 20 years in the IT business, primarily doing large scale transformation with a focus on the human side of the technology, because that old saying, right? Culture beats eats strategy for lunch. I think that's true because ultimately, no matter what the strategy is or how awesome the technology is, ultimately it's about the people to implement that future state. And I've always been fascinated with that, and I've learned a lot, mostly through hard knocks. But it's I'm an experiential learner, and very very process and continuous improvement focused.
Yeah, I know that to be a fact. So let's just jump into the questions that I've had for you. So let's talk about a specific example of a challenge you faced while you're doing an enterprise level business agile transformation, and how did you overcome it? I'm like stacking questions for you here today.
Yeah, so I was working with a Fortune 500 client in a federally regulated environment. And this transformation was about getting the development organization to upskill and become cloud fluent and ready to effectively be able to handle the new technology that was going to be coming at them. And we very quickly ran into a lot of resistance, both from the development community as well as the leaders. And primarily it was the message we were getting back was we're just too busy for this. And how we dealt with this was really starting with just curiosity, right? We felt like we had a good strategy, but given the resistance we were getting, we knew we had missed a beat, and that really was about listening, right, and involving the stakeholders who are going to have to implement this. So, did a number of roundtables and heard that some of our assumptions were wrong about the viability of the tools that we were providing and the time. So we went back, adjusted our strategy, and essentially made more space in their day so that they could learn the new skills. And we also aligned, you'll be hearing me talk about this a lot, aligned the incentives. So you'll also often find when you're getting resistance, there's a mismatch between the existing corporate incentives and the new transformational end state that's desired. So we made sure that goals were adjusted so that not only there was space, but also reward for learning the new skills. And that was a real game changer when we did both of those, providing both the space and the reward. We started to really see folks take off, and that's something that's probably the one of the most valuable, or I guess rewarding parts of the job is right when you start to see the people get it, and sometimes you'll find the folks that are the biggest resistors actually become your biggest advocates, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, when you could match with them, what's in it for me, right? With the shifts and the changes you're trying to make. I mean, that's huge, and it really makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. In terms of organizational change management, I think a lot of people are very familiar with pro-size ADKAR model. And I always say the D of desire is all about the with them, right? What's in it for me? And where I would say that ADKAR is to the head, if you will, like the actual project plan of the change, if you will. But the model that I really like is SCARF, David Rock's SCARF model, because that's all about the heart, right? And like, what will this change mean to me? And so if you can get folks to understand that there's value in this change, there will be, that's really like being able to push a rock downhill versus pushing it uphill.
Oh, without a doubt. But so let's talk about some of the most common misconceptions about business agility practices in large organization. And, how have you addressed those? I know you talked about one of them, but I'm sure there's others that you may want to share with us today.
Yeah, perhaps first and foremost is that the transformational outcomes are self-evident, or that everybody should understand that these are going to be valuable. So I worked for a client, another federally regulated client, so whereby their tolerance for risk was low. So they were always in a state of wanting to manage their risk to a very tight into a tight boundary. And the sponsor of the change was all about speed to market, because they were directly responsible for delivering value for consumers. Well, in this large company, there were plenty of executives whose primary focus, as I mentioned, was managing risk. So for those folks, going faster wasn't necessarily a good thing. For them, it felt like a more dangerous thing. Going fast is dangerous. What if I break the speed limit? I could, go to jail. And so I think it's really important that the sponsor understand what their peers driving with them is, if you will. And I would also recommend that in doing so, in identifying, what makes each of the key stakeholders tick, what do they care about? The outcome or the thing you want to drive is can we create a balanced scorecard? Something that has, a scorecard that has a measure for everyone. So maybe there's a quality measure. Certainly, you're going to have something about speed, which may be cycle time.
Mm-hmm.
But then you might have a quality measure like change failure rate. And you might have something that is for the marketing folks like CSAT. So I think it's really important for us to understand who are our stakeholders, what do they care about, and then creating a measure to show progress along that journey.
Yeah, understanding, what success looks like, and and how you're going to measure that to even identify that you've achieved that is really, really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about a culture of business agility within an organization with deeply rooted traditional practices. I know you and I have been through several companies or several experiences where that's just a reality, right? We're
Mhm.
in this space of change.
Yeah. So I think in that case, you really want to, it's like you say, changing culture often, if you believe Cotter's book, right, culture is the last to change. So I think you want to start out with identifying your coalition of the willing, if you will, and start small with some easy experiments and publish those wins. I mentioned, pushing the rock up the hill. Nobody wants to be Sisyphus, right? Find the people where it's a pull, where they want what you're selling, if you will, and work with them to visualize some positive small term wins. The other thing I think that is really important is you mentioned actually early on in the introduction is honoring the past. Boy, I've seen that so many with the change of leadership, right? Whenever there's a change of leadership, there's, almost always a change of philosophy, a change of goals. And that's fine, right? Because, strategy will always make sense. But I think what's key and is a miss for many leaders is when they don't honor the past, honor the successes of the past. The current state might not be good, but we all know that we got here for good reasons, right? They may not have turned out the way we had hoped, but there were reasons why we've achieved this. And so I really like what you said earlier about honor the past, because I think that reduces the friction to change.
I mean, it's one of the things that I just try to always be mindful of is that it's just honoring the success of the past, because oftentimes, change agents were like, oh, we got to change everything. And it's kind of like, hey, man, slow down a bit. Let's give those people who have made sure that there's enough funds to hire us change agents, a little bit of kudos for the work that they have done. So that's really important.
Yeah, and be mindful of like if an organization is used to only going 60 miles an hour, immediately getting them to go 90 miles an hour is going to be really a real challenge. I think you got to ease your foot down on the accelerator, right? Before you just jam it down. And I think again that I think leaders I think it is the job of executives to challenge their leaders. And I think that's always going to be the case. And I think it's the job of courageous middle management to be able to speak truth to power and say, hey, we recognize we need to go faster, but can we just ease on the accelerator, like not drive all this change all at once?
I mean, that is so true. So let's when we think about leadership and management and the role that they play in the success of business agility at an enterprise level, why don't you give us some examples of how they participate in that process and that shift and that change? I know you started to talk about it, so let's go a little deeper.
Yeah. So with executives, it's for me, it's all about they've got to create a clear and compelling mission, right? What is that? What's the vision of the future? What does that look like? And hopefully we can get them to, I always say they're responsible for the what and the why, right? So this is the vision and this is why it's going to be good for us as an organization. In terms of, I'll say, middle management, a couple things there. Middle management is so important, right? Some will talk about the frozen middle, right? The success or failure of any transformation will often rest on that middle management layer. And you talked about the WIFM. Really important that we have a compelling story for middle management where they feel like, yes, this is good for not just the organization as a whole, but very candidly, me as an individual middle manager. I've seen cases where folks have been asked to take on middle managers or take on an individual contributor role. And in the particular case I was thinking of, they didn't want to be individual contributors. They kind of wanted to climb the ladder of influence, if you will. And I think this is where you mentioned about traditional old world thinking meets hopefully new world thinking. And so a lot of traditional companies will have span of control as a way of identifying total compensation, for example. However, I would say in the new world, we really should be looking at more like impact and influence as more of the determiner of the value that an individual can give for the company. The second thing I'll say specifically about middle management, it's really important that they understand what their role is. And I always say, as middle managers, especially when we're talking about agility, you're not going to be part of the team. So it's not your job to come in and give the solution. I always describe middle management as enterprise impediment busters.
Yep.
So as servant leaders, it's a total shift, right? No longer am I coming in telling the team, here's what we need to do. I'm coming to the team and asking, hey, how can I help, right? What is it that you guys don't have the time or the influence to resolve on your own? How can I help? That is a full-time job, I tell you, and you know this, Dave.
Yeah. And one of the language that I started to shift when I talked about middle managers, and I was with a group of people in Portland maybe 6 months ago, and they referred to them as the messy middle, but I like to think of them as the flexible middle. Right? As opposed to being frozen or messy, how about being flexible in terms of just to change their mindset to get into this adaptive space? So I'm just sharing that also with the audience, just to share a new lens that when I think about middle management per se, is that they're flexible because they have to deal with strategies and try to translate that in a way and to allow the teams to be able to consume that, right? So
I like that, and what's coming up for me on that when you say that is the kind of learning agility, adaptability, as you said, because they're getting it from both sides, right? Their expectations from their bosses, expectations from their team members.
Yep.
And you're right, probably the most difficult job, and for sure, it's critical that they have that adaptive mindset, because you're absolutely right. The role is going to change. It's certainly the technology is going to change, at an increment, at a geometric rate nowadays. But I think that how you deal with people, I think that's eternal.
Yeah, that's huge. So let's discuss some innovative strategies or tools, that that have proven to be effective in enhancing team collaboration, driving continuous improvement in this whole business agility environments.
Yeah, I think that there's. I'm just going to go back to some of the old tried and true stuff. I don't know if anybody listening is probably will say, well, I knew all this, Mike. And I would say, yeah, because, they're oldies but goodies.
Yeah.
So probably number one, first off, is working agreements, right? I think that when you're first establishing a team, you're trying to get collaboration, it's really important to understand how people like to work. Some folks like to be in person. Some folks prefer to be, totally virtual. Quick story. I was talking to another coach it was middle of March 2020. And the entire company said, COVID is now serious. Everybody's going to go work from home. And as an agilist, I was candidly worried about losing engagement. Team engagement would drop, was my prediction, because people weren't face to face. But what I learned was, and happily so, was that due to primarily the technology being what it was, because if it happened 10 years ago, it would have been a gong show, right?
Yeah.
But we had the technology advanced to such a state that it was good. But then the really great thing I would say, was that everyone was going through the same thing at the same time. And so we gave grace, right? Kids were crying in the background. Oh, hey, let's see your kids. Dogs are barking. Hey, come on, let's see your puppy. I love that aspect. So anyway, aligning on working agreements, really important. I would say number two is visualizing the work. Again, none of this is groundbreaking, but visualizing all the work in one place, allows both the team and leaders and stakeholders to see, hey, where's the thing that I care about, and why is it behind these other 10 things? It allows better conversations. And then I would say finally, really is team continuity, right? As agilists, we want to bring the work to the team rather than the old school of bringing the team to the work in project world. And I would say that the more you can have team continuity, right? Fewer changes among the team itself. The more continuity you have, the more trust is built over time. And when you have trust, you have generally faster decision making and better decision making.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's so funny that I think about the more people are experienced, and I'm just speaking from an experience that I've had, is like trying to get them to get involved with working agreements is such a difficult thing. Oh, we don't need to do that because, we somehow by osmosis know that we're going to get along. And oftentimes that's an impediment to the continuity that you're talking about with teams. So it's interesting that you brought up working agreement several times in our conversations, and you would see that the more experienced people, they just don't want to be involved. They don't want to do it. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it's because they think that we all know we're all aligned.
Yeah.
But what I've found is that the things we take for granted, especially how to achieve a particular outcome, is almost always very different. People have opinions.
Yeah.
I would say that people will, almost always align on principles, right? The what and the why. That's, I think, a lot easier to get people to align on. But how we might achieve those, people have opinions. I manage a group of agile coaches, and they're not immune. Very common for Coach A to call me, but hey, Coach B is acting this funny way. Well, did you talk about it? Well, I just expect it. Well, why would you expect? That's my process. Well, do you expect that's his process? Not necessarily. I think it was Neil Strauss who said, unexpressed expectations lead to premeditated resentments.
I've heard that many times. That is such a true statement for sure. Yeah. Been down that road. Know what that's like. Have the big badge and the t-shirt to go along.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, so if you're giving advice, if you're in the business of giving advice to executives and other leaders beginning their agile transformation journey, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think probably number one, because I've seen this half dozen times, but probably number one is to make sure that the corporate incentives align with the desired future state. That is so important, Dave. I was working with a client a few years ago, and this is another federally regulated Fortune 500 company. And our desired goal was to become a much more agile delivery organization. And we achieved that, but it took about 6 months longer to get the original group of teams launched, because there were key stakeholders who were far more concerned with managing risk. And they felt that delivering faster was going to give them less time to evaluate the potential risk associated with any given release. So, in retrospect, we would have been so much better off had our sponsor kind of almost done a persona for each of his peers to recognize, like, what do they care about?
Yeah.
And what's in it for them? And in some cases, there's nothing in it for them. And in which case, you've got to make sure you have enough, executive support at the very top to ensure that that one stakeholder is at least not going to impede your progress.
That is so true. And, my friend Tammy has a question. You remember Tammy that presented with me in Dallas?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So she has a question for you. She said, Mike, how can we ensure team continuity despite having a robust working arrangement or working agreement, I would say?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we need to make two things. I would say we want to make sure we stress the importance to leadership, so that they're not just pulling people off for special project XYZ just on a whim. That's one thing. The second thing is, I would say, make it visible. Let's start tracking the continuity of each team. And by the way, I would say a strong hypothesis would be that the teams with the longest continuity probably have the best results. And you could probably demonstrate that with both customer satisfaction along with other traditional measures such as cycle time or change failure rate or other whatever agile metrics you're tracking.
Yeah. I would agree on that too. But one of the things that I like to measure, and many people don't, is happiness, right?
Yeah.
And engagement. So important stuff.
It's
go ahead.
funny. I think the organization I work for right now is they put an awful lot of influence on voice of the employee, because you're right. It's like hard to say. It's almost a chicken and the egg. Who should you have? Who's more important? The customer, right? Because you always say customer's always right. You want to be customer focused organization. Or is it the employee? And I would always say, hey, if you don't have happy employees, I don't know how you're going to be able to serve your customers. So I definitely think that you have to start with your employees. Yes, you want to be customer focused, but boy, you better have happy employees.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I stressed in a book that I wrote called Deliver Value. In the title, right, is happy contributing people. And I talk about that group of individuals who are employees and partners who help you to deliver that great value, so that you could be a thriving organization.
Yeah.
Essential. I totally agree with that.
One more thing on that topic as well. What's coming up for me now is I had this conversation when I first joined an organization a few years back, and we were changing to agile ways of working from a more traditional waterfall approach. And I had members of my team that were fully on board, other team members, not so much. And metaphorically, I said, hey, look, I need you folks on the bus. This bus is going to Alaska. Yep. We're going to see fjords. We might see, so we're going to see some amazing wildlife. It's going to be awesome. Florida's beautiful too, warm, sunny beaches, but this bus is not going to Florida, And so to me, it's like, you want to paint a picture, but I believe with, Kim Scott says, clear is kind.
Yes.
Right. So I want to be extremely clear about where we're going and expectations, right? Not everybody has to love what they do. Personally, I do. I want to love what I do because I feel like I can always, do the best for my clients and the people around me when I'm loving what I do. And so I would say, I always just give a choice. This is where we're headed. If this isn't for you, I totally understand. But this bus, we're going to Alaska, and I hope you'll enjoy us because it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's about, it's really, setting up those expectations, right?
Yeah.
Alaska is going to be beautiful. Come along. Or there's another option, and I'll be happy to help you to get to that option that's better suits you.
Absolutely. Because nobody, we have a short time on this earth to suffer in silence, or to just be not love what you do. Boy, I've done that. I've been there. And that's real suffering. And I never want to go back to that. And so, that's why I don't want to put on, I want to be extremely clear about what it will be and, hey, what it won't be. And if, like I say, if this person wants to be in Florida, I totally respect that. Florida's awesome, but it's just not where this bus is headed.
Truth. Got to speak truth to power.
Absolutely.
So looking back in your experience, let's talk about some key lessons learned from the front lines of just leading this business agility transformation. Do you believe are essential for achieving sustainable, transformative change? Right. It's just all those lessons that you have learned, the time that you have stubbed your toe, and, it's like you're just sitting there just rubbing, going like, oh my God.
Yeah.
No more.
Yeah. The first one that's coming up for me is that training is enough. And I would say, because when I look at my experience of transformation, of where we actually put in the time to reinforce the change after the training versus dropping people into new ways of working or setting their expectations or whatever the change is, I always find that the transformation that includes a constant reinforcement, whether that's a process engineer, an agile coach, or it's got a champion from middle management, that always works better than basically doing a one and done. When I'm teaching agile classes, I'll always, will congratulate the folks that get their certification. And I'll say, congratulations, you've reached the end of the beginning, right? I can read all the books on golf. That's never going to make me Tiger Woods. I got to go practice, right? So super important that there's a reinforcement and that teams are given the space and the opportunity to apply what they learn, because otherwise, right, it's we all know the rule of learning. It's use it or lose it. In 30
Yep.
days, it's pretty much going to be gone unless we are putting it into practice. That's probably number one. Number two, I would say, the other thing that's coming up for me is when we're talking about methodology change. I heard this from a CIO, but it could have just as easily come from a CFO. And that's that methodology should not add cost. So I was working with a client a few years back, and we were basically moving to agile ways of working. And we recognized that we had to build a product management capability. It just didn't exist in the organization. That was the right decision. The challenge was at the time, leadership wasn't in a space where they wanted to retrain existing staff. So our proposal included basically adding a whole lot of headcount. And frankly, the chief financial officer said, "You know what? This is really expensive. I might as well just stay with my waterfall ways of working." And so I think it's super important that look at the big picture again. Look at what's the driving incentives for all of the executives. Just having executive sponsorship, it may not be enough. It's really important to look holistically at the entire organization.
Yeah, that's true. And it's interesting, just the thinking that methodology should not add cost. And I think to the popular term by an economist that says there's no such thing as free lunch.
Absolutely. Now change costs, like switching costs, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so for example, how do you go about doing that? I think it starts with again, going back to clear is kind. One of the best examples that I could give that I was privy to was a person who was going to basically completely redesign his testing organization.
Yeah.
And they were basically doing manual testing. They recognized they had to get to where everything was automated because manual testing was really going away. And I felt this leader did a fantastic job. He led by example. He was getting certifications and showing that he was doing a lot of learning himself. He was very clear in the objective. He gave them time. It was over a 2-year stretch. He gave space and the tools to go get the training. And he lauded those that were the pillars, the examples, who were really doing a great job of learning the new thing. That said, as you can imagine, there were still folks that chose, kind of opted out, that chose not to go on that learning path. And for a lot of them, it meant that they, unfortunately, didn't have a job in that organization at the end of that 2-year period. Again, we all have a choice to make. But what I really admired about this leader was that I felt like he did everything right in my book, right? Was very clear about the objectives, led by example, gave them space to learn, and lauded the wins along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing but kudos for that leader and the work that he did. So
yeah,
let me share that. So, anything you would like to leave behind, if you think that there's something more that you would like to give the audience?
Yeah, I think probably the most valuable thing that I could leave behind is, while experience is important, I would say to any leader that is embarking on a new transformation, I would say that allow your past experiences, both the wins and maybe the hard lessons, allow them to give you kind of rough guidelines, but recognize that context matters. This new transformation that you're embarking on, has new goals, different goals, and probably most importantly, different people, right? Ultimately, it's always going to be about the people. And so, what made you successful in the past, that may not work here. And so, having an awareness of that and seeking input from those most impacted, those two things alone, I would say that's probably the best advice I could give, because every transformational journey is going to be different.
Without a doubt. So, Mike, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the Knowledge Share with Dr. Dave podcast. Thank you for the partnership that we have had before, and really just thank you for the friendship. It's always so cool to be able to, we could text each other and have conversation about real meaningful things in life. So, thank you for being willing to live in that space with me. Really appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, sir. I love the quote by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you did and say, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And Dr. Dave, you are a great person, and I'm very happy to call you my friend.
Likewise, my friend. So hang tight. Let me just close here. So thank you for listening to the Knowledge Share with Dr. Dave podcast. It's available on Spotify, Apple, Audible, or wherever you get your podcast. So check out my latest book, Generative Leadership to Thrive, and the incredible story about the Ashanti Mwendo series as well. And you could find them on Dr. Dave Duca, or you could find those books also on Amazon, and they're available as Kindle, audio, and Audible, and also some print options. So thank you again for listening. And just remember, the journey to excellence is ongoing, and every step taken with an abundance mindset is a step toward a thriving generative organization. This is really good stuff, and I'm so appreciative that I had an opportunity to just do this with Mike. I'm going to give him a hard time because it's taken us years to get this done, but we got it done. So until next time.
We all have something to share. No share with Dr. Dave.